Hi, I'm Amy Bodkin. I'm the owner of Amy Bodkin Consulting. I'm an autistic adult, former school psychologist, and I homeschool both of my autistic children. I work at my website, amybodkin.com, with families from all over the world who have some kind of a special need. I define special needs as being anything that's a little outside the average where you need a little extra TLC. So it could be trauma. It could be um, physical disabilities. It could be chronic health conditions. It could be a learning difference or a developmental difference. There are so many different reasons why our families might need a little extra TLC at certain points in our homeschool careers. As an autistic adult, I have a lot of insights into what it feels like to be autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, have Ehlers-Danlos, have POTS, so many things that go along with being autistic. But I also have a lot of professional experience in working with children with a variety of different needs and how we can help them grow in a way that is most comfortable but also productive for them. Today, I'm going to be talking with you guys about raising superheroes, helping our children develop confidence. And a lot of what I'm talking about today actually is coming from a book I wrote that should be out very soon. And we will be examining a specific area of what is called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you look at your handout, there's a printout of Maslow's hierarchy of needs on it. It's a little bit more complicated than the graphic represents, but what the graphic represents will help you understand what we're talking about today. So if you look at that, you'll see a triangle or pyramid where the base is physical needs, followed by safety needs, then love and belonging. And that's where we're going to be stopping today. We're going to be stopping at love and belonging. A lot of people ask me, how can I bolster my child's self-esteem? And the truth is that you can't, because self-esteem is self-esteem. It comes from within. But what we can do is create an atmosphere in our home that tends to create feelings of love and belonging and meet those needs within our home. And when we do that, we're setting our kids up to be able to have self-esteem, which is what will come after that. So to do this, I'd like to read you a selection from the book. Let's begin by looking at an ancient blessing that has been part of Western culture for thousands of years and what it might offer us. The priestly blessing found in Numbers 6:24 through 26 is a blessing from God to bestow a sense of love and belonging on the Israelites. May God bless you and keep you. Let God shine his face upon you and grant you grace. Let God lift his face towards you and grant you peace. Many Jewish parents say this blessing over their children every Friday night, and Christians often sing it to each other in their churches. It even appears in pop culture as the Vulcan greeting, "Live long and prosper." Rabbi Foreman suggests that we can view the three lines of this blessing as three building blocks to provide our children with a sense of love and belonging. The first line focuses on blessing and keeping. The word blessing is associated with the idea of increasing. As women, we carry our babies in our wombs with the idea of increasing that baby so that it can be born to a life independent of our body. On the other hand, the word keeping implies the opposite kind of energy, whereas blessing is a positive energy in nurturing the child's growth, keeping or safeguarding is a negative energy in keeping that child protected and safe from harm. Both the words bless and keep come from the same Hebrew root word, the word for womb. Interestingly enough, the word for the emotion of compassion also comes from the name of this most motherly organ in the human body. And having compassion is nothing more than feeling such a strong sympathy with another that we desire to nurture and safeguard that person. This blessing and keeping is something we began doing when our children were first being formed and continue to do until they are one day able to do those things for themselves. We nurture them physically, emotionally, intellectually, and morally so that they will one day become adults and keep them from threats outside and inside themselves. Only the second and third lines mention the face. Once our child is born, the first thing we do is smile and shine our face lovingly down upon our child. The child hasn't done anything yet, but we love them simply because they are ours. That is the definition of grace, a love freely given. It is a top-down kind of love that depends only on one person, the parent. There is no plan to fix the child because they are not good enough. Still, this kind of love does unintentionally lead to the child's growth because it imbues the child with the confidence to look his mother in the face, to babble, to take those first steps, go away from his mother, to meet other people, to try new skills and new activities. It is the one thing each child needs more than anything else. In the third line, our gaze shifts from looking down upon our children to looking them in the face. As our children grow, they begin to take on more and more independence, making more decisions for themselves. We begin to meet their gaze instead of looking down at them. And as they make choices, some of which we will not always agree with, we try to give them a sense of peace or love without a guilt trip. This kind of love is much more difficult for a parent to give, to let go and accept your children even when they disappoint us. As we begin this letting go of our children, we begin to focus less and less on nurturing and protecting them and to instead begin to focus on nurturing and protecting the boundaries that protect the sacred space of our relationship, to make sure that it is always there for both of us. I love that interpretation. I feel like it is a gift that has been given to us to give us some guidance in parenting. But there definitely are some complications, especially when we start talking about, well, how do we take this into the 21st century? How do we make that work? And a lot of that would depend on, more your family. But when you're thinking about that first block, or we're talking about nurturing and protecting, sometimes people will look at that, especially if they have a child who's been born with some kind of a need, and they'll think, oh, you're blaming me for not protecting them enough. And that's not the case. The whole point is to recognize that we have a responsibility as parents to try to do our best to nurture and protect our children. We're not going to do it perfectly. We're going to make mistakes. It's not like they came with a user manual. If they came with a user manual, that would probably be a lot easier. But they didn't. And to recognize the fragility of our children, the protection that they need, the nurturing that they need, even small things such as being aware of their biological needs. If a child has a food sensitivity, that can cause a huge impact on development long term. So those kinds of things are the things I'm thinking more about in that first block where we're starting out with nurturing and protecting. But you could also apply that to mother's stress levels too. And that's a really good idea as far as thinking about self-care of mom, because our stress levels definitely impact our children's hormones in utero and even outside of utero. With my own children, I noticed a huge shift in their mental health when my mental health improved. I didn't do anything for them, but I went to therapy and did some work myself. And as I became healthier and happier, they became healthier and happier. So not saying that to blame parents. That's not the goal. And I also feel like this is a good opportunity to mention that, like, when it comes to children who grow up to be adults with some kind of a need, like specifically autistic adults. If you ask autistic adults what's the one thing they wish their parents had done, most of them will say that they wish their parents had gone to therapy. And the reason is because as parents, it's very easy for us to be reactive in our parenting. And so we can have had experiences ourselves that cause us to react to our children's behaviors in certain ways that may not be the way we want to react. It's just we're kind of stuck back with some experiences and feelings from the past. So self-care and also taking good physical care of our children, providing a nurturing and supportive environment is extremely important. And when we think about plants, it's the same way. You know, you want to provide a plant with a protective environment that protects them enough so they can grow to be stronger. And you also want to make sure that they're being nurtured with the proper nutrients. So as we come to that second block, that whole shining your face lovingly down on your child, this is where a lot of parents have questions. They're like, okay, this is all great. This sounds like, you know, rainbows and unicorns, but how do I get my kids to do stuff and do what they need to do if I'm not trying to, like, you know, if I'm always saying, oh, you're great just the way you are. Okay, so that's a little bit of a simplification. So I want to turn to Charlotte Mason for a moment to give us a little bit of insight on that. Charlotte Mason wrote, "The principles of authority on the one hand and of obedience on the other are natural, necessary, and fundamental. But these principles are limited by the respect due to the personality of children, which must not be encroached upon, whether by the direct use of fear or love, suggestion or influence, or by undue play upon any one natural desire." I don't know about you, but most of the time that I have seen people talking about how we get children to do things, whether that's in schools, homes, and in my own life, a lot of times there's a lot of use of things like fear or love. You know, if you don't do this, I'm going to string you up by your toenails. I'm not really going to string you up by your toenails, but how many times have I heard that one? Or, oh, would you please do this for mommy? Show mommy you love me. Or undue play upon one natural desire. Do you want a treat? Yeah, we do that kind of thing a lot. Or maybe motivating them with, oh, well, if you stay on green today, you can have a special treat, you know. I see that a lot. Now, authority and obedience are incredibly important. You can't just go out and murder people. There are consequences for that. That's not okay. But just because there are expectations we have and boundaries we have to live within, that doesn't mean that we're allowed to manipulate children. And unfortunately, manipulation is something that happens a lot, especially with children and those who may not be able to advocate as effectively for themselves. And I think that's something we have to be really careful about. It's something we have to give a lot of thought to. And I think it's something that we don't give enough thought to. Like, for example, has it ever occurred to you that sometimes we even steal from our own children? Like steal their opportunity to explore or to try their hand at things or to learn their own lessons. The lessons our children learn themselves are some of the most powerful lessons they will ever learn because they're the lessons that they are to learn themselves. And I think sometimes we feel like we can't trust our children or we can't trust God or whatever. We don't feel like we can trust. We feel, and a lot of that's because we care about our children so much. We love our children so much that we're afraid of how we're going to feel if something happens to them. And that's the hard part. But we have to learn to trust them and to trust God. That it's their job, theirs and God's, to learn those lessons and to walk that journey that's before them and not ours. We are guides, but we're not meant to completely direct their path. Some of that is up to them and God. And so because of that, it's really important that we deal with our stuff. We have to learn to acknowledge that we have fears. We're afraid of them getting hurt or something happening to them. We're afraid of how that's going to make us feel. And it's a legitimate fear, and it's okay. It's very common. Um, so as we're staying within this second block, though, we still haven't addressed how do we get them to do what they need to do? Because there are things they have to do. Like I said, there is authority and obedience that is required in life. There are certain boundaries we have to work within, and that is completely true. So how do we make that happen? So I'd like to use another quote from Charlotte Mason. Therefore, we are limited to 3 educational instruments: the atmosphere of environment, the discipline of habit, and the presentation of living ideas. The PNEU motto is education is an atmosphere, a discipline, and a life. This means that we learn from the people, things, events, habits, the life that we live. And we know this. But I think sometimes we don't acknowledge just how much our children learn in general, just from the people that we are. When we are ourselves, when we are healthy versions of ourselves and not reactive and unhealthy versions of ourselves, then they are going to pick up so many wonderful things from us just by being ourselves. We want to be mindful of the atmosphere we live in. And you don't want to create a perfectly designed atmosphere. That's why back when I was younger, a young homeschool mom, and I would see all these beautiful pictures online of all these Charlotte Mason homeschools. And I'm like, oh, we need to do that. That's what's wrong with our homeschool. We need to have a nature study corner, or we need to have our artist study up on the wall. Now I do still have my artist prints up on the wall and I like them there and it works for me. But I was constantly thinking about, well, what do we need? Is it stuff we need? Is it some kind of activities we need? And as it turns out, that wasn't what we needed at all. That would create an artificial environment like a hothouse plant. And when you grow up in a perfectly artificial environment, then you don't have the strength to stand the elements. And so with our Charlotte Mason education, what I have learned is that it is about me approaching a Charlotte Mason education, me wanting to include good stories or art or music to make sure my children are being fed body, mind, and soul on a regular basis with a well-balanced diet. It has nothing to do about changing myself or changing them. It's about opening myself up to those opportunities, being mindful of, well, what are we eating today, brain-wise? We think about that with meals, but do we think about that as far as what we're feeding our children in their mental diet? Mm-hmm. Children will see through our attempts if we try to create the perfect environment and have them try to be the perfect kids in the perfect environment. They'll see through that in a heartbeat. And it's not going to be very healthy for them to grow up in, because then it becomes all about looking like that perfect version of what you think is perfect and not about being that, being yourself. And then it makes it really hard to have self-confidence because who you are is not acceptable. And so you end up trying to be someone you're not. And a lot of times people will call this living authentically. I personally have kind of gotten to where I really like that phrase because it helps me remember that I am a gift. I am a gift to this world from God. And there are beautiful things about me, and there's beautiful things about you too, that are a gift to this world. Now, does that mean that we're always perfect angels? Absolutely not. But there are certain things that about us that are a gift. And if I try to pretend to be somebody else, then I am stealing that gift from the rest of the world. And although sometimes we will punish our own selves, it's a lot harder sometimes for us to punish our world, the children at large, when we'll withhold from ourselves. Like if you don't have a lot of food and your child wants more food, you'll probably give them the food off your plate, because that's what we do as parents. Um, Sacrifice is something that we're accustomed to. You don't become a parent unless you're willing to sacrifice. There's sacrifice involved in every aspect of parenting. Yeah. And so by living authentically, I think of that as looking within yourself and going, what is that gift that God has given the world through me? What is beautiful about Amy? What does Amy have to offer this world? And instead of looking around at everybody else's gift going, oh my goodness, my gift doesn't look anything like theirs, we need to start thinking, hey, you know what? That's good, because I don't want all my gifts to be the exact same. That'd be incredibly boring. Who wants all the same gifts? Nobody does. So yes, one of the things I often recommend to families is go to therapy, because a lot of times talking with somebody who has a little bit more of an objective view of where your blind spots are and where your biases are and where you're more reactive is going to be helpful. But I also think that one of the things that can be really helpful is really defining what your principles are. Because when we know what our principles are, then we know how we want to live. And I don't mean principles in terms of rules. Rules are different. Principles are the feelings that mean the very most to you, that remain the same even when like no one else is around, even when you move to a different country. If you went out to outer space, they'd still stay the same. Okay? And that's challenging, because a lot of things change based on location and atmosphere, environment, the people you're around. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of ones I came up with for myself. So for behavior, my principle of behavior is we are respectful, kind, and appreciative to all creatures, including ourselves. My principle of activity is we habitually prioritize what we believe is most important, not perfection. Parenting. Children are born persons worthy of respect and personal freedom. Religion. We take time daily to connect with our own spirits and with God. Education. We regularly partake in a rich and varied feast of ideas. Health. We listen to our bodies daily and provide them with what they need. So as you see, these are all basic values that don't run contrary to any like specific approaches. These are like your big guiding principles, and yours may be completely different, and that's totally fine. But what are those big ideas that guide you? Because that's going to determine how everything else goes. They inform the spirit with which we make choices. Now, rules are different, and I feel very strongly that rules are important, despite the fact that I've been talking about all this touchy-feely stuff. Rules are important because they help give us some boundaries of what's really like most important as far as what we do to protect the relationships around us. That's why rules are important. They are a social construct. Ask an autistic to talk about this, because social constructs are something that we are very sensitive to because we miss them most of the time. And this is why I appreciate spelled out rules. And in our home, we have spelled out rules. Generally speaking, you want about 3 rules for any one place or location, because that's about as many as kids can remember, and that's about as many as parents can enforce consistently. And what you don't enforce consistently, they're not going to follow. when we don't make specific rules and then enforce them consistently, then our children will end up feeling like they're walking through a minefield because they don't know what the expectations are. And they're constantly afraid that they're going to run into some kind of a consequence, especially if they're autistic. Trust me, I know. um, so with rules, these vary very much based on your social circumstance. Rules, social rules, they all look very different depending on what country you're in, what area of the world, what region. Our Southern social rules are very different from the North, for instance. We talk a lot slower. People say all the time that we say, bless your heart. What that actually means is, I'm so sorry you're not getting it. We really don't mean them any snide remark about it. It's just, you're just not there yet, sweetheart. Northerners will talk a lot faster. If you go to Israel, people are a whole lot more direct. So it really depends on the culture that you're in as to what kinds of social rules are going to be acceptable. And that's the same way with our homes. It depends on the home you're in. Different families have different things that they need to happen. And especially at different ages. When our children were small, we had rules like we stay out of the fireplace because one of my kids kept climbing in the fireplace. So I'd pick her up, put her in the packing place. She'd scream, she'd stop screaming, I'd let her out. She'd do it again, we'd go back through it, and eventually she got the hang of it. We also had rules like we sit in chairs on our bottoms. Because if you're sitting in your chair on your bottom, you can't stand on the chair on your head. You can't cartwheel off the chair. It just solved a lot of other problems. So if you tell them what to do, then it eliminates a lot of other problems. But as they got older, it became more about what we really valued. And so our 3 rules to this day, and my children can tell you what they are because we used to go over them every single day. It's stamped in their mind. They know exactly what the expectations are, and they know what will happen. And our rules are, we are kind, we are truthful, and we do our work. Now, those 3 rules are extremely abstract. And because of that, they don't get in trouble automatically just because they broke the rule. We talk about it. Okay, hey, do you realize that wasn't very kind? Yes, but I'm so mad. Okay, well, let's process through those feelings. And then after we finish processing and figuring out what's going on, then we need to figure out a way to make some kind of restitution. Do we need to apologize to someone because we hurt their feelings? But first, we have to deal with what's going on inside here. Because if we're not feeling good about something or something's bothering us, then we're not going to be in a good place to apologize or to care about somebody else's feelings. Same way with, being truthful. Why are you not being truthful? Tell me what's going on. And also with doing our work changes from day to day, but it's just kind of an emphasis on the fact that we all have things we have to do. And we all have to take care of those things each day because we're all individuals and we all have responsibilities. So that really helped us. Now, obviously, there are sometimes consequences for breaking rules, but when they are abstract rules, a lot of times it starts with, let's have a conversation. Let's talk through this. Where is this coming from? And yes, we all make mistakes. Mom isn't always kind to everyone. Mom doesn't always remember to tell the truth or to do her work. Sometimes we have bad days, and that's okay, but we keep working at it. So, and especially talking about bad days, I have 3/4 of my household is autistic. That means there's a lot of meltdowns that happen in this house. And autistics are not the only ones who have meltdowns. A lot of other people have meltdowns too. This is where the idea of being hangry comes from. When you're hungry and you're angry and you're tired, well, yeah, you're going to get grumpy because your sensory needs aren't being met. It just so happens that autistics often have their sensory needs not being met properly more often because our sensory processing isn't working out quite as well as it's supposed to be. And it's just this point of having imbalance and that we recognize that we need to find better balance. And when you get bad news, then sometimes that can trigger a meltdown. And recognizing the difference between you're just throwing a temper tantrum because you feel like being a jerk um, and having a meltdown where you are just so tired and so beat down and you just can't take it anymore and you need a timeout, whether you're an adult or a child. And sometimes we do need timeouts as adults. I've many times run through my house and said, Mommy needs a timeout. Everybody go to their rooms. And we'd all go to our rooms because I couldn't guarantee that they were safe if they weren't in their rooms. Um, but I'd have my timeout. And so timeouts weren't ever a punishment. It was a, hey, you need a timeout to go chill because you're not feeling your best. And it's hard to be treat others the way we want to treat them when we aren't feeling our best. And so that was a big part of it. And also meltdowns, I want to read you this portion of the book because I think it's really, really important. And it also shares a little bit of a personal moment in our home that I think might be meaningful to you. So other times when we end up having a meltdown, it's because we forget to take time to listen to our bodies. When we inevitably reach a meltdown, we have passed the point of being able to utilize coping strategies or to do anything other than react. It is at this point that the family mobilizes to provide needed support. Sometimes this means helping a child utilize coping strategies when unable to do so themselves. Sometimes this looks like encouraging a parent or child to take a break in a place of sanctuary from the overload. Other times, this looks like one parent making sure the children feel well supported while the other parent is processing through their meltdown. How we talk about these moments after they occur is important because they teach our children how to become supportive spouses and parents. As an adult, I still occasionally have meltdowns, but not as often as I used to. One particular meltdown has lived down in our family's history as Hurricane Amy. I was so incredibly overloaded that I actually upended furniture to meet my need for heavy work sensory input. Not one of my prouder moments. However, our children had seen me support them through meltdowns so often that this particular time they could assist their dad in helping me, which was an amazing thing to see. My daughter texted me saying, I know you're upset and I'm happy to help you, but you are being so loud, too loud for me right now. When you are quieter, I will help you. Once I ran out of energy, they all came in the room, hugged me through my tears of frustration, joked about Hurricane Amy's destruction, and helped me pick up the room. Afterward, my daughter made us each a cup of tea and we sat down to discuss why I was overloaded. Later, once I had de-escalated entirely and returned to a more balanced state, I apologized and worked to make restitution for any discomfort I caused. Home is where people love you just the way you are, support you through hard times without taking it personally, and set the standard for what kind of treatment you will tolerate from others, including yourself. And I want to close with this idea. Well, and actually before that, I want to bring us back to that third building block that we had been on. That third building block of looking your child in the eye and giving them a sense of belonging. It's about looking them in the eye as they grow into themselves and give them a sense of peace or love without the guilt trip. We can be afraid to let go. And that's probably one of the hardest things about parenting is learning to let go. How do we learn to overcome this fear, though? We learn to overcome it by learning to say yes as often as possible when our children are young. The more we get used to saying yes to our children and trusting them with small things, the easier it will be to say yes and trust them with big things as they grow older. I'm going to close with a short story. Our family therapist once told me that this was when our children were younger, that she was really impressed with how free and yet secure our children felt. She likened it to what I was doing basically unintentionally, was that it was like sending a child out into a forest, but it actually wasn't a forest. It would be like sending a child out into a backyard that looked like a forest, but unbeknownst to them, was surrounded on all sides by a 6-foot privacy fence. I was constantly trying to make sure that they had protections in place so that I could say yes as much as possible. And it's this fence that allows you to say yes instead of no. But to have those fences that are there to protect our children, to give them the freedom so that you can say yes more often, you have to think ahead. And we can't be parenting from a reactionary place. And this is the work that we have to do as parents. We have to know our principles, choose our rules and habits wisely, and build fences to protect our child's autonomy and our relationship with them. Thank you so much for being with me. Please go check out my website at amybodkin.com, especially if you're interested in reading more of this book. And also you can join me on Facebook at helping special needs homeschooling help with Amy Bodkin EDS. And I'm also on Instagram as well. It's been a pleasure being with you guys.